People always ask me the same question. Was it really worth it? Was it worth leaving America at 62? Was it worth selling my house, giving away most of what I owned, saying goodbye to my children and grandchildren, and flying almost 10,000 miles to begin again in the Philippines? I never know how to answer that in one sentence, because the Philippines didn't give me the perfect retirement I had imagined. It gave me something much more complicated. It gave me a different life. My name is Linda. 5 years ago, I was 62 years old and living in Dayton, Ohio. I was divorced, retired, and looking at my finances with a growing sense of fear. After the divorce settlement, taxes, insurance, and everything else, I expected to have about $2,200 a month from my pension. At first, I thought that sounded manageable. Then I started doing the math. Housing, utilities, groceries, gas, insurance, medical expenses, property taxes, and, if I was lucky, something left over to actually enjoy retirement. I wasn't going to be homeless. But I was going to spend the rest of my life worrying about money. That frightened me more than moving to another country. So I started researching Mexico, Costa Rica, Portugal, Thailand, Malaysia, and eventually the Philippines. The Philippines kept appearing in retirement groups and expat forums. The cost of living was much lower. English was widely spoken. The weather was warm, and people seemed incredibly friendly. I watched videos late at night and read stories from foreigners who had already moved there. Some loved it. Some hated it. Some returned home. But one person kept encouraging me to try. His name was Terrence. He had moved to Dumaguete a couple of years earlier. He would send me pictures of himself sitting near the beach, eating huge Filipino meals, and relaxing outside his rented house. Every time I asked him how life was going, he gave me the same answer. You should come and see for yourself. Then he would add, "What are you waiting for?" I didn't have a good answer. I was 62. My children were grown. My marriage was over. And I knew that if I waited until I felt completely ready, I might never go. So I made a decision. I would give myself a chance. If I hated it, I could always come home. 1 week after my 62nd birthday, I boarded a plane. I had 2 suitcases. That was almost everything I had left. I arrived at Mactan Cebu International Airport on March 14, 2019. The first thing I noticed was the heat. Not warmth. Heat. Heavy, wet, tropical heat. Within minutes, my clothes were sticking to me. Terrence had arranged a small hotel in Mabol. The taxi ride from the airport was my first real introduction to Cebu. There were jeepneys everywhere. Motorcycles squeezed between cars. Families rode together on scooters. People crossed streets whenever they found a space. Cars honked constantly. I remember looking out the window and thinking that the traffic made absolutely no sense. Yet somehow everyone knew what they were doing. At one point, I saw a man on a motorcycle carrying something that looked almost as large as the motorcycle itself. The driver beside me didn't even react. He had probably seen stranger things. That first night, I wasn't laughing. I sat alone in the hotel room. I could hear motorcycles outside. Dogs barking. People talking. And somewhere nearby, someone was singing karaoke. Very loudly. I looked at my 2 suitcases. Then I thought about my children. My grandchildren. My house. My old neighborhood. Suddenly, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. For 3 days, I seriously considered getting on another plane and going home. Then, on the 4th day, I walked into a small carinderia. I didn't know what most of the food was. So I pointed at pork adobo rice and a fried egg. The entire meal cost around 75 pesos. About $1.50 at the time. I took one bite. It was delicious. The woman running the restaurant noticed me struggling with the spoon and fork. Her name was Lourdes. Everyone called her Nana Lourdes. She showed me how to eat the Filipino way. When I finished, she put another scoop of rice on my plate. I told her I was full. She ignored me. "You eat more," she said. Then she looked at me and added, "You too thin." I almost laughed. I weighed around 220 pounds. But Nana Lourdes had already decided I needed more food. I came back the next day. Then the next. Within a week, she knew my name. She knew I was from Ohio. She knew I was looking for an apartment. And somehow, the entire neighborhood soon seemed to know too. People started bringing me rental options. Someone's nephew knew a landlord. A customer knew someone with an empty apartment. The security guard knew a family looking for a tenant. That was one of my first lessons about the Philippines. Information doesn't always travel through websites. Sometimes it travels through people. Eventually, I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Banana. It had a small kitchen, a living room, 1 bathroom, and a balcony overlooking a mango tree. The rent was 15,000 pesos a month, around $300. My mortgage in Ohio had been around $1,100. Suddenly, I had hundreds of dollars more every month, and that changed everything. My water bill was cheap. Internet costs around $30. Groceries were around $200 to $250 if I cooked. Eating locally was even cheaper. A meal at a carinderia could cost less than $2. A nicer restaurant might cost $5 or $6. Electricity was the surprise. Air conditioning was almost impossible to avoid, and my electric bill could reach $150 or $200. Still, my total monthly expenses were roughly $1,000 to $1,200. For the first time in years, I had breathing room. I could save, I could go out, I could handle an unexpected expense. I realized something then. Financial stress had been aging me. When that stress became smaller, I felt younger. But money solved only one problem. It didn't solve loneliness. Everyone had told me how friendly Filipinos were. They were right. People smiled at me. Neighbors greeted me. Security guards knew my name. Shopkeepers recognized me. People wanted to know where I came from. But there is a difference between being welcomed and being understood. I could talk to people all day. What I couldn't easily find was someone who understood what it felt like to be 60, divorced, retired, and thousands of miles from your children. I missed my grandchildren. I missed being able to drive to my daughter's house. I missed ordinary conversations with people who already knew my history. Terrence was in Dumaguete. We talked often. But phone calls weren't the same as having someone sitting beside you. I met other foreigners. Some were young digital nomads. Others were older retirees. Some were wonderful. Others seemed to spend every day complaining. They complained about traffic, the government, food, Filipino culture, other foreigners. Sometimes I wondered why they stayed. I didn't want to become one of them. So many evenings, I sat alone on my balcony. The sunset was beautiful. The air finally became cooler. Children played somewhere below. Music drifted through the neighborhood, and I could feel peaceful and lonely at exactly the same time. That was something I hadn't expected. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Then I learned about bureaucracy. My first major experience was immigration. I arrived early because I thought I would beat the crowd. I didn't. There was already a line. I waited for hours. When I finally reached the counter, I was told I needed 1 photocopy. So I left the building, found a place to make the copy, returned, and got back into another line. Then I discovered that the person processing my paperwork was on lunch break. By the time I finished, most of the day was gone. At first, I was furious. Eventually, I learned to laugh. Whenever I went to a government office, I brought water, snacks, a book, and plenty of patience. Getting angry didn't make anything happen faster. It only made me miserable. Banking was another adventure. Opening an account as a foreigner required documents I hadn't expected. One document led to another. Another office led to another line. It took weeks, but eventually I got the account. Walking out of that bank, I felt strangely proud. Not because opening a bank account was impressive, but because I had learned how to navigate something that had seemed completely foreign. That became the rhythm of my life. Learn, fail, adjust, try again. Then came the noise. Ohio had seemed noisy to me before. The Philippines made Ohio feel silent. Roosters woke me before sunrise. Dogs barked at everything. Motorcycles passed constantly. Tricycles rattled down the road. And then there was karaoke. I thought karaoke was something people did at parties. In the Philippines, it seemed to be a daily activity. Sometimes it started in the afternoon. Sometimes it continued until midnight. One neighbor loved Frank Sinatra, especially My Way. I heard that song so many times that eventually I couldn't hear the opening without smiling. I bought earplugs, then a white noise machine. Eventually, I stopped noticing it. That was one of the first signs that I was adapting. I was no longer comparing every single thing to America. About 4 months after I arrived, I met Maribel. She was in her 40s. Smart. Funny. She had her own job and spoke excellent English. We started dating. At first, everything was easy. Then small requests began. Her niece needed school supplies. Her mother needed medicine. A relative needed help fixing something. None of the requests seemed unreasonable. Each amount was small, but they became more frequent. Eventually, I understood that this wasn't necessarily about taking advantage of me. It was cultural. In her family, if one person had more, that person helped the relatives who had less. Family wasn't simply an emotional relationship. It was responsibility. I respected that, but I also knew my pension wasn't unlimited. We talked about it. I told her I could help sometimes, but I couldn't become responsible for everyone. She was hurt. I was frustrated. Eventually, the relationship ended. There wasn't a villain. We simply came from different worlds. That experience taught me something important. You can't judge another culture using only the rules you grew up with. But you also can't pretend cultural differences don't matter. Healthcare was another issue I had to take seriously. The Philippines has excellent doctors and hospitals, especially in major cities. Routine medical care could be dramatically cheaper than in America. I once had blood work and a complete checkup for a fraction of what similar care might have cost me back home. But quality varies. Major private hospitals can be excellent. Smaller facilities may have fewer resources. I learned that when I experienced chest pain, real chest pain, I went to a private hospital. They ran tests. They kept me overnight. Thankfully, my heart was fine. It turned out to be severe acid reflux. The entire visit cost around $350. I was relieved, but the experience forced me to think about the future. What if I had a stroke? What if I needed surgery? What if I developed cancer? Living abroad is easy when you're healthy. Growing old abroad requires planning. I eventually bought private health insurance. It wasn't perfect. There were exclusions. There were limits. And there was plenty of paperwork. But I felt better knowing I had something. Then Terrence had his accident. He was riding a motorcycle near Dumaguete when he hit a pothole and went over the handlebars. He broke his collarbone and several ribs. The local hospital treated him. But eventually, he had to go to Manila for corrective surgery. He recovered. Thankfully. But the total cost was close to $8,000. That number frightened both of us. It reminded me that cheap living doesn't mean life is risk-free. You still need an emergency fund. You still need insurance. And you still need a plan. Then came the typhoon. I had seen typhoons on television. I thought I knew what to expect. I didn't. The wind became stronger. Rain hit the windows sideways. The electricity flickered. Then disappeared. The storm sounded like a freight train passing directly over the building. I spent hours sitting in the bathroom because it had no windows. When morning came, the neighborhood looked completely different. Trees were down. Branches covered the streets. Power lines had been damaged. My balcony furniture had somehow ended up in the mango tree. But what happened next stayed with me. People came outside and started cleaning. Neighbors helped neighbors. Someone cooked food. Children carried small branches. People shared what they had. Nobody waited for someone else to fix everything. They simply started working. I remember watching a man drag a huge branch from the road while laughing with his neighbor. That was when I understood something about Filipino resilience. People here can go through difficult things and still find reasons to laugh. They still share food. They still celebrate. They still help one another. My first year was the hardest. There were days when I wanted to leave. Not because anything terrible had happened. It was the accumulation of little frustrations. The traffic, the heat, the noise, the bureaucracy, the feeling of always being obviously foreign. There is a period many expats experience, where the excitement disappears and the differences become irritating. I reached that point. Then I started making real friends. Chris was a retired Filipino teacher who lived nearby. We started talking in the evenings. He taught me some local words. I was terrible at pronouncing them. He laughed at me constantly. Then there was June, a tricycle driver who seemed to know everyone. He knew the cheap markets, the honest mechanics, the good restaurants. His wife, Gina, was an incredible cook. They invited me to their home for Sunday lunch. Their house was small. Their children were everywhere. There was food, noise, laughter, people coming and going. And somehow, I felt comfortable there. I also found a small group of retirees who met every Wednesday morning. We called ourselves the Wednesday Club. There was Harold, a Canadian, Jeff, from Britain, Art, an American, and Wally, a quiet Norwegian who barely spoke. But when he did, everyone listened. Those people became important to me. They understood what it meant to live somewhere that wasn't the place where you grew up. When I was frustrated, they understood. When I was lonely, they understood. When I questioned my decision, they reminded me why I had come. One morning, Harold said something that stayed with me. The Philippines isn't paradise. No country is. You just have to decide whether you can build a life here. That changed the way I looked at everything. I stopped searching for paradise. I started building a life. Then Nana Lourdes got sick. She developed pneumonia and had to close her little restaurant. That meant no income. She was also helping support her grandchildren. I decided to help with her medicine and groceries. It cost me around $150. When she recovered and reopened, she refused to let me pay for food. Every time I tried, she waved me away. "You are family," she said. "Family doesn't pay." I remember sitting at her little plastic table with tears in my eyes. I had moved thousands of miles away because I was afraid I would lose my connection with people. Instead, somehow, I had found people who were becoming family. Not because we shared blood, because we shared life. Then the pandemic arrived. Everything stopped. Businesses closed. The Wednesday Club stopped meeting. Nana Lourdes closed her restaurant. The streets became quiet. For someone living alone in a foreign country, it was frightening. My daughter called me constantly. She wanted me to come home. She was worried about me. I understood, but something had changed. I didn't feel like I was waiting to return to my old life anymore. I wanted the Philippines to get through the crisis. I wanted my friends to be okay. I wanted Nana Lourdes to reopen. I wanted to sit with Chris again. Somewhere during those months, I realized something. Home was no longer only Ohio. Home had become the place where my new life existed. Today, I'm older. I'm still not Filipino. I still make mistakes. I still misunderstand things. I still miss my grandchildren. But I don't feel like a tourist anymore. I know where to shop. I know how to deal with immigration. I know which restaurants are worth visiting. I know how to prepare for a power outage. I know how to prepare for a storm. I know where to go when I need medical care. And yes, I've learned to live with cockroaches, although I still hate them. I moved to another apartment with better ventilation. My expenses became lower because I learned how to live locally. I stopped trying to recreate America. That was one of the biggest changes. I didn't need American food every day. I didn't need American routines. I didn't need everything to work exactly the way it did back home. I learned to accept the place I had chosen. Every morning, I buy fresh Pandezel and coffee. Sometimes Chris joins me. Sometimes June drives past and honks. Sometimes one of Nana Lords' grandchildren brings food to my door. I never ask. It simply appears. Every Sunday, I video call my grandchildren. They know me as the grandmother who lives in the Philippines. My daughter eventually accepted my decision. My son visited me. He stayed for several weeks. On his final night, we sat together outside. He looked around. Then he said, "Mom, I understand now." That sentence meant more to me than he probably realized. Because I had spent years worrying that my family thought I had abandoned them. I hadn't. I had simply chosen to continue living. So, was it worth it? Yes. But not because the Philippines is perfect. It isn't. There are problems. There are frustrations. There are days when I miss America. There are moments when I wish something worked faster. There are times when the heat makes me wonder why I ever complained about Ohio winters. And there are still moments when I feel lonely. But I have something now that I didn't have before. I have breathing room. I have friends. I have community. I have stories. I have a life that feels like mine. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that 62 wasn't too old to start over. For most of my life, I thought getting older meant making your world smaller. Fewer risks. Fewer changes. Fewer surprises. I thought retirement was supposed to be about staying comfortable. But comfort can become another word for being afraid. At 62, I was terrified that my best years were behind me. Now, I understand that I was simply standing at the beginning of another chapter. I didn't move because I believed the Philippines would magically make me happy. I moved because I wanted another chance. Another chance to live without constantly worrying about money. Another chance to meet people. Another chance to discover who I was without being someone's wife. Without being only a mother. Without being defined by the life I had already lived. I thought I was leaving everything behind. I wasn't. I was carrying the most important part with me, myself. So if you're watching this and thinking about moving abroad, don't romanticize it. Do your research. Visit first. Understand healthcare. Know your finances. Keep an emergency fund. Stay connected to your family. And most importantly, be willing to adapt. Because moving to another country won't automatically make you happy. If you're lonely in America, you can be lonely in the Philippines. If you hate change, the Philippines may frustrate you. If you expect another country to behave exactly like America, you'll spend your life angry. You have to accept that you're the visitor. You have to learn. You have to make mistakes. You have to become a beginner again. That was perhaps the hardest lesson for me. At 62, I wasn't used to being the person who didn't know how something worked. I wasn't used to needing help. I wasn't used to asking questions. But once I accepted that, everything became easier. I stopped trying to control everything. I started observing, listening, learning, and slowly, the unfamiliar became familiar. 5 years ago, I thought I was moving to the Philippines because I couldn't afford the retirement I wanted in America. That was true. But it wasn't the whole story. I was also looking for a second chance. And I found one. Not a perfect second chance. A real one. A life with traffic. Heat. Karaoke. Typhoons. Bureaucracy. Cheap food. Beautiful sunsets. Unexpected friendships. And people who sometimes helped me without asking for anything in return. That is what the Philippines gave me. Not paradise. Possibility. And maybe that's what I needed all along. You don't have to move 10,000 miles away to start over. You don't have to sell your house. You don't have to leave America. Sometimes starting over simply means admitting that the life you've been living no longer fits the person you've become. For me, that realization came at 62. I was terrified. I boarded the plane anyway. And 5 years later, when I step outside in the morning and hear the roosters, motorcycles, dogs, and distant karaoke, I don't hear a foreign country anymore. I hear home. So when people ask me whether moving to the Philippines was worth it, I don't tell them it was easy. I don't tell them it was perfect. I tell them the truth. It was difficult. It was frustrating. It was lonely. It was also one of the best decisions I ever made. Because I stopped waiting for the perfect moment. I stopped waiting for enough money. I stopped waiting for permission. I simply decided to try. And that decision gave me a life I never would have known existed. I'm still here. Still learning. Still adapting. Still missing my grandchildren. Still laughing. Still making mistakes. Still trying to pronounce Bisaya correctly. Still occasionally getting charged too much. Still eating Nana Lords' food whenever she lets me. And if I could go back to that frightened 62-year-old woman sitting alone in a hotel room in staring at 2 suitcases and wondering what she had done, I would tell her one thing. Don't go home yet. You haven't met your new life. Because sometimes the biggest mistake we can make when we're afraid is assuming that fear means we're making the wrong decision. Sometimes fear simply means we're standing at the edge of something new. And sometimes, even at 6, the best chapter of your life hasn't happened yet.